Over the last 10 years, we've been caught up in a hustle storm. Think Rick Ross, the t shirts, the tote bags, those neon signs that seem to be ubiquitous in every hipster coffee shop, all encouraging us to move faster, work harder, do more, cram it all in, and grind, grind, grind. But lately, we are seeing an awakening or reckoning, if you will, that hustle culture is dead. Is it? And if so, what gets to take its place? Let's talk about it. Welcome to the Fab Life Project podcast. I'm your host, Amber J. Adams. This show is all about asking the questions that challenge us to elevate our lives while also having the conversations and discussions that empower us to show up as who we really are. We're on a mission to help millennials live courageously and intentionally. Let's get it. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. You know what? I'm always excited about every episode, to be honest with you, but I'm really excited to get into a discussion about this topic in particular because I feel that for millennials, this word has come to define so much of our adulthood, so much of our time, and a big chunk of the way that we were really. I don't know if I want to say we were taught to think this way, but it started to really define how we move through the world. And that word is hustle. So today we're going to be talking about hustle culture. I'm going to be asking the question, is hustle culture dead? And we're just going to get into some of the things that really have driven this. I don't even know if to call it a cultural phenomenon, but what has driven us towards hustle and what is driving us away. So when you hear the word hustle, how do you feel? What emotions come up for you? Does your body tense up? Do you frown? Are your shoulders set? Do you get into your fighting stance? I have to say that the word hustle still gives me a feeling of cringe. It feels almost triggering for me, really, even as I was doing the research for the show, because of all of those feelings of go, 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 more, more, more that I really harnessed in my 20s and my early 30s. And a lot of that just really came rushing back for me as I was doing this. And so, I always like to be official. I like to really look into things. So when I'm getting prepared for these episodes, I come up with the idea. I try to see what really sits well or kind of strikes me in my body. And then I start out doing my research. And so for this, I was reading a lot of articles, watching a lot of YouTube videos, trying to gain a lot of different perspectives. But I always like to start where it really all begins, which is definitions for me. So I like to go be official, look in a dictionary. And so we know hustle as, kind of the slang word of hustle might be that something that you're creating on the side. Maybe it's a hobby that you're turning into a business. So it's in that transitional period between the two, or just this attitude and this feeling of doing as much as you possibly can. But the dictionary actually defines hustle in a couple of different ways, and they all seem to have a bit of a theme. One is force, and the other is movement. So some of the definitions that came up were that hustle is defined as force to move hurriedly or unceremoniously in a specified direction, to obtain by forceful action or persuasion, busy movement and activity, a fraud or swindle, or to push, crowd, or force forward roughly. So you see, nothing about these definitions is really positive. So, how did it become a thing? And why, oh, why did we need to see hustle culture die? So, going back a few years, if we think about it, hustle culture was really the perfect storm of technology and the glorification of entrepreneurship and startup culture as the latest version of the American dream. So we've talked about the American dream a little bit before, or maybe we've touched on different pieces of it, but that dream, as explained to us as children, was really around going to school, getting the job, getting the house, having the 2.5 children, the picket fence, all of these things that just really kind of solidified your space in civilized society and all kind of looked the same way. But of course, when you start peeling the layers, you get to something that is really upholding capitalism, and by the trickle down effect of that, really harmful ways of kind of living and really defining your identity. And so when it comes to hustle culture, this kind of really cropped up in that space where I think a lot of people were really trying to redefine that American dream for themselves. So they didn't want to fully let go of all of the things. And when I say people, I mean us, I mean our generation. We were the ones who were really on the cusp of this, because I would say that our parents, our grandparents, they were all for going for the American dream, getting the houses, and kind of really lining up to do the things that we were told would make us successful, especially if you are a person of color, if you are a woman, because we know that, the bend of history has not always been in our favor. So when we had those moments to kind of jump in and grab a piece of that American pie, we went for it, even if it seemed like a lot of these things almost came at our own detriment. So, as we've gotten further down the line and we got out of school and we got into jobs, what we found was this mix between technology just really changing. Like, if you think back to when email became a thing, if you're an older millennial, you remember the moment when you got your first email address and you were able to contact people instantaneously. We weren't in the workforce then, but we can imagine, and now we know because this is our life, how that would have changed the way that people worked. That's something that you could do at home, be on your computer, look up things, research, and just kind of have fun with it, was brought into this workspace, and it became something that just allowed the workday to continue on, to really blur the boundaries between who you were at work, who you were at home, and really just start to mix into this space where it seemed like all we could do, or what you could do, was just work, work, work all the time. And so it really set the groundwork. It set, the space for that hustle culture to really come in, because everything started to shift and become about productivity, the grind, glorifying busyness and burnout as badges of honor, because we came into this space where we no longer saw ourselves as human. We didn't look at ourselves as humans being, but as humans, and seeing, oh, what can you do? What can you do with this moment, with that moment? And how must you just continue on, continue on, continue on without any type of break? Because breaks were seen as a bad thing, because we were modeling our humanity after systems and machines that quite literally can just stay on, until you actually physically shut them off. And so, well being be damned, people felt burnt out. I would say that, we felt guilty if we weren't working, but we also felt bad. And it became this space where we couldn't even really talk about that without it seeming as if we weren't down for the hustle, that you weren't working as hard as you possibly could be doing to make sure that you were doing all that you could, that you were living up to your potential, and there was just really this frantic energy around it. So it's been said that hustle is just another word for workaholic, which was the word that really was around in the 90s and the 80s. But I actually disagree, and I would love to hear your opinion on this, because I feel like being a workaholic felt like a choice for people, whereas hustling in its many forms has come to feel more like a survival tactic that all of us did not ask to participate in. It just began to feel like the baseline, like this is where we are and this is what we have to do. So, where are we now? Prior to the pandemic, There were small cries that hustle culture was damaging and that it was toxic, but it was so easy to shut these dissenters down, right, and call them lazy or whatever the opposite of change maker is, because the broader culture that we've been living in was really hyped up on the hustle, hustle, hustle all the time. But by the time 2020 hit, and by the time we got to April and May of 2020, and even beyond, of course, it was clear that something big was shifting. That sitting in our homes with nothing to do but ponder life and worry about all of the bigger questions was giving us the space to not only just sit, but to shift as well. And so slowly we started seeing people writing about rest, doing videos about wanting to feel heart centered, of wanting to actually enjoy their life without their work and their hustles as the ultimate measure of their self worth through the lenses of capitalism and productivity. We started seeing more people wanting to be human, to distance ourselves from that machine and that data thinking. And as we're seeing more people coming to this space, it's been really interesting to watch. It's been really interesting to watch. I remember when I went through my hustle stage back when I was in my 20s, my early 30s, in those early days of me living in New York City, I was surrounded by overachievers, corporate hustlers, if you will, who left me feeling both inspired and overwhelmed, depending on which day you caught me. And so I was into it, I would say. Like, I definitely had several ideas. I remember at one point wanting to start like a website called Saturday Hustlers, right? With the idea being that, Saturday was the best day for you to get your hustle on. But my true identity, my true need, or my true identity is really kind of a little rebellious person, but my need for an identity outside of work pushed me to challenge this idea of hustle early on. And that's really where the Fab Life Project was kind of built from. This idea that life existed beyond the definition of work kind of being the end all be all for your life. And I would say that for me at that time when I was pushing back, the mistake I made was relegating some of my ambitions to the sidelines rather than realizing earlier on that there was a better way. But I would say that at that time we still weren't sure what that way was. But now where we are, especially going from 2020 to where we are now, it has become glaringly obvious to everyone that there needed to be a better way. Like, we never had that time before where it seemed like we were all really just getting on the same page culturally, institutions, organizations, companies being forced to rethink some of the things that they had done, because now, people were moving to this space where they were demanding more from the organizations that we patronize, from the organizations that we work for. And really, I think it was also a space in which we saw that we as a people have a lot more power to create change than I think that we had really been giving ourselves credit for. Just even a few years ago, because a big piece of going along with the status quo and living in those spaces really causes you to get into a space of complacency, because complacency becomes easier. It becomes easier to just go along with whatever's in front of you rather than to challenge things, especially when you were by yourself. But suddenly we have been put into this place where we were all going through this collective experience. Of course, the panini, as we call it on the web, right? Going through this collective experience. And while we were all experiencing it in different ways, there was a baseline, I think, of everyone kind of really taking this step back to think through, what does this mean for my life moving forward? Especially if you are really doing the deep thinking, man, we make it out of this. What do I want to be doing? How do I want to be spending my days? And I don't believe that I want to be spending my days rushing, grinding myself for what, you know? So I've seen that, and I think that you all have probably seen that as well. We've seen this shift in people starting to question the role that hustle and the role that productivity, toxic productivity, of course, plays in our life. It was almost like something snapped, and we just realized that we were placing emphasis on the wrong things, and that burnout didn't have to be our permanent state of mind or our way of being. So now what? This leads me to the place where I say and ask the question: is hustle culture really dead? Or is this just a phase that, we're going through because we had the time and the space to examine it? But if you've decided that you don't want to live that way, that you still want to pursue your ambitions, that you still want to, pour your energy into work that is meaningful for you, but you don't want it to line up with this toxic and this frantic energy of the hustle, then how can we stay in this place? How can we stay in this place of, turning it from being a rebellious act into something that is just the way your life moves? So I would say that in hindsight, I probably could have called this episode, How Can We Make Sure Hustle Culture Stays Dead? And in doing my research for this show, I came across several articles that basically said, don't throw the baby away with the bathwater, that if we don't hustle, then, well, who are we? Articles that asserted that the opposite of hustle is apathy, and that without hustle as our ethos, no one would work hard, or that we wouldn't have a work ethic. That, of course, I obviously call BS on. So I ask you, what does this look like now? How can we stay in this place of awareness of how we want to feel in our bodies and our mind, in our work? How can we feel aligned with the space work occupies in our lives without allowing it to spill over and become our lives? Because that's really what that hustle mindset demands of you. So as I was thinking about these things, I have, a few suggestions. One, some things that I feel have worked for me, also ideas that I want to toss out there because I'm an ideas person. Like, I've never been comfortable saying, do this, do this, do this. That's not really how I roll. I like to have ideas. I like to have discussion. I like to have discourse. So I would love to get you all's input on this. Um, but a few other things that I've thought about is that I think we have to think of work, one, as a journey with choices that we can make, you know, that depending on how we want and need to get where we want to go, that it just might look different at different times. So, to use an analogy, freeway versus the street. If you are someone who drives, and now, I live in New York, so I don't get to drive very often, which I kind of enjoy. But in my driving days, right, I would often have to decide if I was going somewhere, did I want to take the streetway? That's what we would say. Do you want to take the streetway or do you want to take the freeway, take the highway? The freeway is going to get you there faster. But of course, there's more stress, right? You have to merge into your lane. You have to watch out and like go the speed of everyone around you. You have to be on alert for different things, different types of obstructions that pop up along the course because you're moving at such a high speed that you have to at any point be prepared to kind of pivot on a dime. So a little bit different than going the street way. Whereas if you take the street and you decide, okay, I'm going to take the street, the reason you take the street is because it's a slower route, yes, but it also allows for a different type of thinking. So when you're taking the street way, it might be that you are kind of enjoying it more. You're looking at the scenery as you go by. It feels more like, relaxing Sunday drive versus a Monday morning commute. But I think at different points in our life, there are times when the freeway makes more sense, and there are times when taking the streetway makes more sense for you, or it's the luxury that you have, that luxury of time, so you choose to do it that way. And so for me, that kind of comes back to that hustle mindset or kind of divesting. I like that word. I love to use the word divest. So when I get to use that, I'm going for it. Divesting from that hustle mindset where it's really recognizing the journey for what it is, the journey, and actually allowing yourself to see the things along the way to your destination, because that's what it's about. When you're on the freeway, you're not seeing anything. Like, show me a freeway that looks good, with the exception of maybe the one in like California where you're traveling along the coast. But for the most part, it's just frantic energy, right? But when you're taking the streetway or you're taking the more scenic routes, you're also having a moment where you are really seeing what's happening along the way. So, there's that saying that's like, yeah, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And that for me is one of the ways in which we can divest from that hustle culture and get into something that feels more flow, less hustle, more flow. Another thing that I think is really important to throw out there is, how can you expand your identity beyond work? And I actually want to do like a whole episode around this, because I think that, for millennials, we're really in that important place where we are getting older, and getting older, is a fabulous thing. All right. Yes, aging. All right. We're just going to embrace it, because it means you're alive and well. But it also means that our lives are stratifying across a lot of different spaces and across a lot of different lines. And we have to figure out, you know, ways for our identity to exist that we didn't necessarily, in some cases, plan for, but didn't necessarily always see coming as well. And so work just kind of naturally gives you something to attach yourself to. But if you challenge yourself and said, okay, what is my identity beyond this thing that I go do? Um, then I think that you end up in a different space. You end up in a different space of really challenging yourself to get into different interests. Maybe it's, pursuing things that you've always wanted to do, just things that kind of make you feel truly like a more well-rounded person. So how can you expand your identity beyond work? Because I think that's another way of really stepping away from this hustle culture and really defining something new for ourselves. The other thing, and this is a big one, and we kind of talked about this a little bit in the last episode, was letting go of this idea that everything in your life, every accomplishment and accolade that you seek, has to happen prior to a certain age and stage in your life. That's another one that, oh my God, like, I will do an episode around that for sure, because I think we have a lot of our angst really comes from feeling like, man, I had to do this before I turned 30. And of course, there's all these lists of things to do before you turn 30. And there's such generalizations, right? They do not serve us well. They don't serve our well-being either, because there's all that comparison, and comparison is a thief of joy, and it's just bad. But thinking about, there's time to accomplish things, right? So now I'm in that stage where it's like thinking of things that you do before you turn 40. Like, it's almost like turning 40 is that Cinderella, like the pumpkin, the coach turns back into a pumpkin, and suddenly, you're just somewhere you never thought you would be. But being somewhere you never thought you could be, what could be also a beautiful thing. And so I think it's really, for us, it's stepping back, because when you have that frantic energy and you feel like, oh man, this age is a limit, I have to do everything before this, I have to make this happen. What does it really do for you along the way? What does it do for your sense of being and your feelings of joy? That I feel like, when we talk about hustle, a big piece of that culture is putting your well-being on the back burner. It's not prioritizing making sure that you feel well. And I think that, like, going back to the freeway analogy, you can only do that every so often. It's not meant to be the entirety of how you move through the world at all times. So yeah, I think that's a big one. And I think it all ultimately comes down to recognizing that we can enjoy the journey and the things we learn away, that it doesn't have to be fast or nothing. Doesn't have to be fast or nothing. So I think the hard part is reminding ourselves that the journey is a thing, that when it comes to this need to hustle, that there will be moments in your life when you need to just kind of like get shit done, right? Where you've got to just focus, got to hustle, make it happen. But that cannot be sustained. It's not sustainable. It's not a sustainable way to live. And I'm excited that we have finally gotten to this place where I think more of us recognize that and we have the opportunity to shape something different. For me, it's always about the opportunity. There's that, when I call this the Fab Life project, that project piece is meaningful. It means building, it means change, it means that we have the opportunity to create something different in this moment. And I think that generationally, we are leaders in that space, or we have the capacity to be leaders in that space. So I'm going to leave you with that. We have the capacity to lead, y'all, and we've got to jump on it. We've got to take it, but we got to enjoy the journey too. So cool. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you really aligned with what I'm saying and you feel like there are other people in your life who could stand to hear this, please share it with them. Sharing is caring. They say, so share it out. I'm excited to bring you out more things, and I would love to get some discussion going. Apparently, there's some type of feature. I haven't figured it out yet, but maybe I'll figure it out by the time this episode goes live, where you can do polls. People can call in and leave messages. How much fun would that be? I absolutely love that. So I'm going to figure that out. But I'm going to let y'all go. Have a fab rest of your day, a fab week, wherever you happen to be. And I will rock with y'all later. All right. Amber out.